Today, let's make a wedding guest dress. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this dress. Now I'm starting off with a little bit more of a review for this, as the Etsy pattern I found wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. Now for my dress, I found this pattern off Etsy that I really liked. I like the idea of the top part being all covered, but then having this slit on the side, and then I did like this belt detail. Now the one thing that I will say is that when I ended up buying this pattern, the pattern pieces were different than what this image is. So the sleeves were longer, and there was just a little bit, there wasn't a slit included, so I did have to do some work on this. I will include a link to this Etsy pattern in case you're interested as well, but just be careful that that picture on the front is not what the actual dress ended up looking like. But what I did first was I created a mock-up. So with this mock-up, I figured out if the sizing was correct for me, and then I cut out all the pattern pieces accordingly. I bought my fabric from Mood. I'll include a link to that if you're interested. And then I just began the process of essentially doing the princess seams on the front, as well as sewing up the back bodice pieces as well. So this was one of my first time doing princess seams. I didn't find it too difficult. I think I did a blazer with them a while back, and everything came together really nicely. Now the best part about this was that there were different notches and marks that you just had to line up. So once I did that, I was able to get all of it ready to go. Now the back portion was very similar, so all I had to do for that was match up the notches as well. And then I was just able to take that seam for both the back and the front and very slowly start building out the bodice. Now for this fabric I'm using, this was a stretch material, so I did opt for a walking foot, and I found that this made it so much easier for sewing this fabric up, and I will be sure to include a link in case you're interested in this walking foot that I'm using. I did a whole video on it, but it made everything go so smoothly. And then before I did all of the sewing, I did test out with the fabric the best type of thread I wanted to use, make sure the walking foot worked, and just had everything ready to go. Now once I had this sewn up, I then went through and took some little notches, as well as creating those little slits so that the fabric would lay nice and smooth. This is a really important step, especially when it comes to sewing these princess seams, as when we are turning this, we're going to have it folded, and it's going to be on that curve. Now for some of this, I did end up using pinking shears, as my fabric has that black lining already, so I'm not going to be lining this dress, and the pinking shears were used to just help keep the fabric from fraying over time. Once I had it all done, I just went through and pressed out those seams, and then I did do some serging for the other seams that I knew I would not be actually doing any curved effect with or having to clip any of those curves. Once I had that done, I then just sewed the shoulder seams together for the front and the back. At this point, the sides are staying open, as we will be having to add one zipper. So I just did the shoulder seams first, and then I did try this on to see how it fit before I started sewing up those side seams on the other side, because I wanted to be sure that everything was laying exactly as it should. I was really happy with the fit, so then I took the one side seam, and then I'm going to leave the other one open for the zipper. I then continued on with serging the bottom of the bodice so that it would just be one continuous serge seam around the bottom. Here's what the dress currently looks like. I pinned up the bottom though for those different panels. Everything is coming together really nicely. So now what it was time to do was start working on the sleeves. So the sleeves had you add these little dots, and then you're going to be taking a gathering stitch between those dots, and that's going to help us with creating that little cap sleeve effect. So I just took 2 gathering stitches, as well as serge the sides of the sleeve, and then I'm just going to be bringing the sleeves with right sides together and sewing up that long straight edge for the sleeve. So this is basically putting our sleeve together, and I'm just going to be taking a seam all the way through, repeating this for both sleeves. Once I had that done, I then pressed open that nice seam and then started to do the hem for the sleeve itself. So this is just a rolled hem, so I folded it over about 1/2 inch, pressed it, and then took that seam all the way through. And so as you can see here, I have the first step of that rolled hem done. So I'm just going to be taking that seam. Then once I have that seam done, I'm then going to go back to my iron, press it all out again, fold it over so I can get that nice rolled hem effect, and then just take that seam one more time. So for this, I think that in the future I probably would have made the sleeves a little bit shorter than what they were, but overall it came together really nicely. Now it was time to attach the sleeve to the actual bodice itself. So you very carefully use those gathering stitches to get your sleeve to fit within the dots that we did, so those pink seams that you can see on my fabric. And I'm just going to go through very carefully, sew the sleeve into the bodice of the dress. So I did this very slowly. Once I had that seam done, I tried it on, made sure it fit, and then I serged it all up to make it nice and clean. So here is what my sleeve looks like. I thought that it came out really well. I was really happy with it. So I'm just going to repeat all of those steps for the second sleeve. And with that said, I then moved on to the skirt portion. So the skirt is made up of different panels. There are 3 darts we need to do, and then I'm going to be having one panel that is going to be a slit. Now the slit is not part of the actual pattern itself. I added that separately. So I cut the large main front panel into essentially 2/3 and then 1/3. So this 1/3 piece, I am just going to be sewing up to a very specific point. So I measured out how high I wanted the slit to go. And then I am just going to be sewing that with a straight stitch all the way down to wherever that point is that I made. So if you wanted the slit, make it however high or low you wanted that to be. Then I just took a straight seam, and then for the darts, I just pinned those in place as well, matching the fabric and then putting my pins so that I would know where to start and stop. And I repeated this exactly all these steps for each of those portions of the skirt. Now for the actual slit portion, I did top stitch it so that it would look really nice and clean as well. And I thought that this just gave it a really nice effect. And when you see it on the final dress, it looks really cool how you can see this nice top stitching that is done, as well as this keeps those seam allowances from showing. Then it was just time to start pinning together the rest of the skirt panels. On one skirt panel on the side, you do not sew it up, as we will be adding a zipper on that portion, but basically the front and the back are coming together and you're going to leave one side open. I found this really easy to do and was really exciting as my skirt was really coming together for the dress. Once everything was done though, here is what this dress currently looks like. So you can see we have that skirt portion started. We have our darts in the back. I have my back of my dress as well. So we are going to be adding a zipper up at the top there. And then if we look over at the side, you would be able to see there is an opening. What I ended up doing for the back of the dress though, for that top portion, is I ended up just basting it so that it would be much easier to sew the top portion of the dress to the bottom portion. Once I had it basted, I just went through and matched with right sides together, the top of the dress with the skirt, and then I just took a seam all the way around, being sure that I left that one side seam open, as that's where the zipper will be going. So all of these steps are actually really straightforward in the pattern itself as well. So a lot of this was just going step by step. The only thing that I really needed to add was that slit. So you can see on the side here, I still have it opened, as that we're going to be adding one zipper. And this is where we start to work on our invisible zippers. So I got my invisible zippers from Amazon. I just went with this navy Coats & Clark. The first step with invisible zipper is you want to press that open so it is nice and it's kind of more flat looking. You can see that the teeth actually start to curve out more. And then we're going to be pinning this with right sides together to that side seam we had on our dress. So this is where the first zipper is going to be going in. I'm just going to be taking a seam to lay it in place. I like to baste mine first, so as you can see here, I've actually basted the zipper in. It looks good. Now I'm going to repeat this for the second side. So basting that zipper in to make sure that it's all laying correctly. And then once I go through, sew it up, I will then see, is it zipping correctly? Am I happy with how it looks? And then I go through and do that final stitching. Now I actually have a whole video up on using an invisible zipper foot, so I will be sure to link that in case you are interested as well. I was really happy with how this was turning out, and the zipper was looking really nice and neat with this fabric, so I just went through and took that final set of stitches. Then once the zipper was in, I just sewed up the rest of the skirt portion on the bottom. So here's what my zipper looks like. I think that it turned out really nice, really smooth. I probably will go back in and just hand baste some of that down so that the zipper doesn't pop open in any way, but everything's looking good with the zipper. So now it is time to continue on. Now the next step was to add the second zipper. So this dress has 2 zippers, which is actually pretty common for formal dresses. The second zipper is going to be going at the top. So very similar to before, I pressed open my zipper and then with right sides together, I matched that zipper to the right side of the fabric. And then did all the same steps as before. So I basted my zipper in first, making sure that everything looked good with it, followed that using that invisible zipper foot, and then I just continued on making sure that everything looked good with it. Now for my invisible zipper foot, I did use a generic invisible zipper foot. Coats & Clark said you needed to use one of their own. I did not have any issues with that. So here's what my top invisible zipper looks like. It came together so nicely. I was so happy with it. And at this point, both of our zippers are now in our dress. So next up, it was time to work on the neckline. So this is where things got a little confusing with the pattern, as it included a collar as well as a facing, which I cut both out. There was no instructions really for what you're supposed to do with the facing. I ended up going with the facing option as I thought it was going to be a lot easier, and at this point, since I had done so much with the dress, I didn't want to mess it up with trying to add a collar. For the facing though, I pinned with the right sides together the two back portions of the facing as well as that front, and just took a seam. As you can see, you did have to add some interfacing to it. I didn't have any issue with this as far as getting it to stick to the fabric, but be sure to test it out with your fabric. Then once I did that, I just serged all of this up so that it would be nice and neat. I found that this was a really simple way to just finish off that neckline, but if you really wanted to try adding the collar, there were steps for it. I was just a little confused by the pattern for what I was supposed to do, and this seemed a much better option. I pinned with right sides together, that facing to the neckline, and just very carefully sewed all the way through. Now this is on a curve, so you do want to take your time, be sure that you are clipping any of those curves, creating those notches so that when you fold it in on itself, it lays nice and flat and smooth. Once I had that completed though, I then folded this so that I would do some understitching, so sewing that facing to the actual seam of the fabric, and this is just going to help it lay so much better when you put it on. So here's what the completed neckline looks like. It looks so clean, so smooth. I'm so happy that I went with the facing instead of trying to add the collar. The only step that was really left was to press it all so that it was nice and flat. And then I'm just going to go through and hand stitch the facing down. So wherever that seam allowance is, I'm just going to be taking some little darts and making sure that the facing can stay on it and that it doesn't pop off at any other time. And this will help it all lay nice and smooth. In addition, I went through and did some hand stitching for the zipper portions to make sure that the facing stayed down on that. Then it was just time to hem the dress, which my mom did help me do this, so I tried the dress on and then she pinned for how much I needed to sew for the hem. I ended up doing a 5/8 inch hem and it came out perfectly. So here's what my dress looks like. I'm really happy with how it turned out. It definitely was different than what the pattern sort of made it entail to be, so I did have to do some modifications, but it fits really nicely and I'm so happy I got to wear it. I will include a link to, again, the pattern in case you're interested, as well as all the supplies I used will be linked in my Amazon storefront. I hope you have a very happy wedding guest season if you decide to make this dress. Be sure to tag me on Instagram if you do. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe.